The Grammy was cold against Melody Santos' skin as she held above her head, naked and trembling in front of three aging rock stars who remembered when the award had actually meant something. They'd told her this was how the music industry really worked. Young talent servicing legends who'd earned a right to whatever they wanted. The golden gramophone wasn't for her achievements. It was a prop in their sick fantasy about discovering fresh talent in Hollywood's most exclusive clubs. 2 years earlier, Melody had been busking on the beaches of Rio de Janeiro, her voice carrying over the ocean waves as tourists dropped coins into her guitar case. She'd grown up in favelas, where music was the only escape from poverty and violence. Her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. Her father had disappeared when she was 12, and her 3 younger siblings depended on whatever money Melody could earn from singing on street corners and in subway stations. The dream of American stardom felt impossibly distant until Jake Morrison appeared like an answer to prayers she'd been afraid to speak. He was vacationing in Brazil, he said, scouting for fresh talent for his Los Angeles production company. Jake had worked with major labels, produced albums for artists whose names Melody recognized from international radio. His business card was embossed, his clothes expensive, his manner confident in ways that suggested real power in the music industry. Jake recorded her performance on his phone, asked questions about her musical background, seemed genuinely impressed by her natural ability and untrained technique. She sang in Portuguese, English, and Spanish, demonstrated range that had developed from years of performing in different venues for diverse audiences. This was raw talent, Jake told her, the kind of authentic voice the industry desperately needed in an age of manufactured pop stars. The offer seemed too good to be real, which should have been her first warning. Jake's production company would sponsor her visa, pay for her travel to Los Angeles, provide housing and training while they develop her career. She'd work with professional musicians, record demo tracks, perform at industry showcases where record label executives would hear her voice. The contract he showed her was thick, impressive, full of terms she didn't fully understand, but that seemed to promise everything she dreamed of. Melody's family was skeptical but desperate. The money Jake offered as an advance, $5,000 just for signing, was more than they'd see in 2 years. Her mother could stop cleaning other people's houses. Her siblings could stay in school instead of working. The risk of traveling to America with a stranger seemed acceptable given the potential rewards and the grinding poverty they faced every day. The journey to Los Angeles was more complicated than Jake had initially described. First, she'd fly to Mexico City, where she'd meet other talented musicians Jake was bringing to America. From there, they'd travel overland a border, crossing a location where Jake had connections who could expedite the visa process. Everything would be perfectly legal, he assured her, just faster than going through normal embassy channels. In Mexico City, Melody met 5 other young women, all aspiring musicians from different Latin American countries. There was Carmen from Colombia, who played guitar and wrote her own songs. Lucia from Ecuador, whose voice could handle everything from folk ballads to rock anthems. Ana from Peru, a drummer who'd been performing since childhood. Each had her own story of meeting Jake, her own dreams of American success, her own family depending on her making it in the music industry. The overland journey to the border took a week, traveling in a van with equipment Jake claimed was for mobile recording. The women practiced together, learning each other's styles, imagining the album they record once they reach Los Angeles. Jake filmed their impromptu performances, saying he was documenting their development for potential investors. Everything felt professional, purposeful, aligned with their musical ambitions. The border crossing itself was anticlimactic. Jake's connections turned out to be legitimate immigration lawyers who processed their artist visas efficiently. No drama, no danger, just paperwork and official stamps. Melody felt naive for having worried about illegal entry. This was clearly a professional operation run by someone who understood the legal requirements for bringing international talent to America. Los Angeles exceeded every expectation. Jake's production facility was a converted mansion in the Hollywood Hills, complete with professional recording studios, practice rooms, and comfortable living quarters for resident artists. The views of the city were breathtaking, the equipment state-of-the-art, the atmosphere exactly what Melody had imagined when dreaming of making it in America. but there were no other musicians. Jake explained that the facility operated on cycles, bringing in talent for intensive development periods, then moving them to independent contracts with record labels. The current group would have exclusive access to resources while they developed their sound and built their professional network. It was an opportunity most artists would kill for: personal attention from industry professionals in an environment designed for creative success. The first month was paradise. Melody and the other women worked with professional musicians, learned to use recording equipment, developed their stage presence under expert guidance. They recorded demo tracks that actually sounded professional, performed at small venues Jake arranged, met industry professionals who seemed genuinely interested in their talent. Everything felt legitimate and promising. The shift began subtly during the second month. Jake started talking about industry realities and the importance of building relationships with influential people. The music business wasn't just about talent, he explained, but about networking, about understanding what powerful people wanted and providing it. Success required flexibility, willingness to do whatever was necessary to advance careers. The first industry showcase was at a private mansion in Beverly Hills. Melody and the others performed acoustic sets for an audience of older men who Jake identified as record executives, music producers, and entertainment lawyers. The audience was attentive, appreciative, and clearly wealthy. After performance, they mingled with guests who asked detailed questions about their backgrounds, their musical influences, their personal lives. But the questions became increasingly personal as the evening progressed. Men old enough to be their fathers asked about relationships, sexual experience, willingness to do whatever it takes to succeed in Hollywood. When Melody expressed discomfort, Jake pulled her aside to explain that this was normal industry behavior. These men had power to make or break careers. Tolerating their attention was part of the business. The second showcase was more explicit. The venue was the same Beverly Hills mansion, but this time guests expected more than just musical performances. Melody was assigned to spend time with Richard Stallworth, a legendary guitarist whose albums had defined rock music in the 1970s. He was now in his 70s, wealthy from decades of royalties, and accustomed to buying whatever he wanted, including young women who reminded him of groupies from his touring days. Stallworth wasn't interested in Melody's musical development or career prospects. He wanted her to recreate fantasies from his prime, to play the role of a starstruck fan servicing her musical hero. When she tried to decline, Jake intervened with cold explanations about contracts and obligations. The agreement she'd signed included provisions for promotional activities and client relations that apparently covered whatever services these industry veterans expected. The legal terminology was deliberately vague, but the practical reality was clear. Melody and the other women weren't being developed as musicians. They were being groomed as high-end escorts for aging rock stars and music industry executives who paid premium prices for fantasy of discovering and deflowering fresh talent. Their musical ability was real, but it was being used to make the exploitation more convincing. The operation was sophisticated in its psychological manipulation. The women were housed in luxury, provided with professional musical training, given real opportunities to develop their skills. But this investment was designed to create emotional attachment to their situation, to make leaving feel like abandoning genuine career opportunities rather than escaping exploitation. Jake revealed the full scope of the business during Melody's third month. His production company was actually a recruitment and management service for wealthy men who wanted elaborate musical fantasies. Clients paid enormous sums, $50,000 or more, for experiences that combined their nostalgia for rock and roll's golden age with access to young women who could convincingly play the role of aspiring musicians grateful for career opportunities. The aging rock stars were particularly lucrative clients. Men like Stallworth, whose sexual appetites had been legendary during their prime, now paid enormous sums to relive those experiences with women young enough to be their granddaughters. The musical element made the encounters feel less like prostitution and more like mentoring relationships that happened to include sexual components. Other clients included music producers, record label executives, even some musicians who were still active but wanted to experience the power dynamics of their industry's earlier, less regulated era. All were wealthy enough to pay premium prices for fantasy experiences they couldn't access through normal channels. The women's artistic abilities were crucial to the operation's success. They had to be genuinely talented enough to convince clients that they were real musicians with legitimate career potential. Their performances had to be convincing, their musical knowledge authentic. Clients were paying for fantasy of seducing talented artists, not obvious prostitutes pretending to be musicians. Melody's contract, which she now understood properly, bound her to provide whatever services clients requested in exchange for the career development she'd received. The musical training, the professional recording equipment, the industry connections, all of it came with sexual obligations that had been hidden in legal language about promotional activities and client relations. Escape seemed impossible. Her visa was controlled by Jake's organization. Her family in Brazil had received advance payments that would be clawed back if she fled. And she had no understanding of American legal systems or resources for trafficking victims. The luxury of her situation made it difficult to recognize as exploitation, especially when contrasted with the poverty she'd left behind. The other women faced similar constraints. Carmen had tried to leave after her first client encounter, but Jake's lawyers had threatened her with deportation and civil lawsuits that would bankrupt her family. Lucia had attempted to contact Brazilian authorities, but Jake's organization had influence with immigration officials who viewed the women as willing participants in legitimate artist development programs. The special performances became increasingly elaborate as clients paid more for complex fantasies. Melody found herself performing in scenarios that recreated specific moments from rock history, playing the role of a backup singer seduced by a famous guitarist, a young fan who'd won a contest to meet her idol, a struggling musician willing to do anything for her big break. Some clients were almost gentle, treating the encounters as nostalgic indulgence rather than explicit exploitation. Others were cruel, using their wealth and power to act out violent fantasies they claimed were inspired by rock and roll's rebellious history. All of them understood exactly what kind of operation they were supporting, regardless of whatever musical interest they claimed. The Grammy incident occurred during her 6th month. A client who'd won multiple awards in the 1980s wanted to recreate the experience of being a successful musician discovering new talent. The props included actual Grammys he'd won decades earlier, which Melody was required to hold while performing various acts. The symbolism was intentional. She was meant to worship the award she'd never earned while servicing the man who had. That night, holding the Gold Medal Award while 3 rock legends watched from leather chairs, Melody understood how thoroughly her musical dreams had been corrupted. The Grammy she'd imagined winning through talent and hard work had become a prop in someone else's sexual fantasy. The music industry she dreamed of joining was revealed as a continuation of exploitation that had always existed behind the glamour. The breaking point came when Jake announced plans to expand the operation internationally. The women would tour private venues in Europe and Asia, performing for wealthy clients who wanted similar musical fantasy experiences. Melody realized this wasn't temporary exploitation to advance her career. It was permanent imprisonment disguised as global success. But the international expansion required updated documentation, which meant interaction with federal authorities who processed entertainment work visas. During a routine interview about her upcoming tour, Melody encountered an immigration officer who recognized signs of trafficking. Her answers about her musical career, when probed carefully, revealed inconsistencies that suggested coercion. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Federal agents raided Jake's mansion while clients were present, capturing evidence of the sexual services being provided alongside the musical performances. The sophisticated legal structure Jake had created to protect the operation ultimately documented its criminal nature, providing prosecutors with detailed records of trafficking activities. Melody's rescue felt surreal. One moment she was preparing for another showcase. The next she was being interviewed by FBI agents who understood that her musical training had been a cover for sexual exploitation. The transition from victim to witness happened so quickly she struggled to process the change. The legal proceedings revealed the scope of Jake's operation. Over 5 years, he'd trafficked dozens of women from Latin America, all recruited through false promises of musical careers. The clients who paid for services included some of the biggest names in rock history, men whose albums still sold millions of copies worldwide. Most clients faced minimal consequences. Their wealth provided legal protection that kept their involvement largely secret. Some paid fines, made donations to anti-trafficking organizations, continued their lives with minimal disruption. The ultra-wealthy rarely faced meaningful punishment for exploiting the desperate, Melody learned. The system protected those with enough money to buy whatever they wanted, including other human beings. Jake received a 20-year sentence for trafficking and fraud, but his organization's financial networks proved too complex for complete prosecution. Money had been laundered through dozens of legitimate music industry businesses, making it difficult to distinguish between legal income and profits from exploitation. Melody's visa eventually led to permanent residency, then citizenship. She found work with a legitimate music therapy program, using her skills to help other trafficking survivors process their trauma through artistic expression. The career she dreamed of took a different form than expected, but involved actual music rather than performing for wealthy predators. The other women faced varied outcomes. Carmen returned to Colombia but struggled to rebuild her musical career while carrying the trauma of trafficking. Lucia remained in America but found it difficult to perform publicly, too reminded of how her voice had been used against her. Anna completely abandoned music, finding any artistic expression too connected to her exploitation. Therapy helped Melody understand that her musical passion hadn't been destroyed, just temporarily corrupted by those who'd use it against her. She learned to separate her authentic artistic voice from performances she'd been forced to give. Music could still be healing, even after being weaponized for exploitation. The music industry's response to the scandal was predictably inadequate. Some organizations implemented new protections for international artists, but the fundamental power dynamics that enabled exploitation remained largely unchanged. Wealthy men still sought ways to access young women, and desperate artists still needed opportunities that predators could manipulate. Melody spoke at industry conferences about trafficking prevention, warning aspiring musicians about offers that seemed too good to be true. But she knew her audience included both genuine reformers and potential predators, studying her words for insight into how to avoid detection. The music business that had exploited her passion remained fundamentally unchanged by her survival. 3 years after her rescue, Melody released an album with an independent label. The songs dealt with exploitation, survival, and rebuilding identity after trauma. Critics praised its raw honesty. Survivors found inspiration in its message, but commercial success remained elusive. Authentic art about trafficking wasn't as marketable as the fantasies that had once made her a commodity. She kept one recording from her time with Jake's organization, a demo track she made during her first week, when she still believed in the promises about career development. Her voice on that recording was pure hope, untainted by understanding what was really being offered. Sometimes you listen to it, remembering the woman who believed music could transform her life. The Grammy that had been used as a prop in her exploitation was returned to its original owner, who claimed ignorance about how his awards had been used. The music industry preferred to forget the details of how its legends spent their retirement, focusing instead on their artistic legacies rather than their participation in trafficking operations. Melody's story became a cautionary tale of musician protection workshops, a warning about how artistic dreams could be weaponized against dreamers. But she knew similar operations continued, adapted to avoid the mistakes that had led to Jake's exposure. Somewhere in Los Angeles, other young women were being recruited with promises of musical stardom, their voices being trained for performances they'd never imagined. The mansion in the Hollywood Hills was sold to a legitimate music producer who converted it into an actual artist development facility. But Melody knew the location was irrelevant. The exploitation would continue in other venues, other cities, wherever wealthy men could buy the fantasy of discovering and corrupting fresh talent. She'd come to America to make music, and discovered instead how music could be used to make her a commodity. The industry that had promised to amplify her voice had instead used it to attract predators who paid premium prices for the experience of silencing young artists. The dream of stardom had become a nightmare of servicing rock legends who saw her as a disposable pleasure rather than a person with talent worth nurturing. But her voice survived, even if the context changed. Melody continued making music, just for different audiences and different purposes. The Grammy she'd held as a prop would never be hers to win legitimately, but she'd found ways to use her art that mattered more than awards or industry recognition. The rock legends who'd paid to exploit her continued touring, recording, being celebrated for their contributions to music history. Their participation in trafficking remained largely secret, protected by legal structures and media reluctance to challenge beloved artists. The industry that had enabled their exploitation of young women continued operating much as it always had. Melody knew that somewhere in America's vast entertainment landscape, aging stars still paid for fantasy of discovering fresh talent they could corrupt. Young women still arrived with dreams that could be twisted into nightmares. The music played on, but for those who knew its true cost, the songs would never sound quite the same.